Half my dock was gone. Just gone. Like someone took a damn chainsaw to it in the middle of the night and dumped the whole thing into the lake. How the hell did it get to that point? And what came after? Man, buckle up, 'cause this story will blow your mind. You know, I never asked for any of this. All I ever wanted was peace, just a quiet life by the lake, fixing boats and minding my own damn business. I wasn't trying to make a statement or pick a fight. That dock, the little red shack behind the house, even the half-sunk aluminum canoe I still haven't gotten around to pulling out of the water, they weren't decorations or hobbies. That was my life. That was home. The land's been in my family for longer than I've been alive. My dad bought it back when property out here was basically dirt and dreams. Back then it wasn't a community, it was a bunch of loners and old-timers who wanted space and didn't much care what the neighbor's grass looked like. I grew up running barefoot down that shoreline, skipping rocks, catching minnows, and helping my dad redeck the dock every few years when the boards gave out. He passed it down to me after he died, and I never thought twice about keeping it. That place, it's not just a piece of land, it's him. It's every memory I've got left of the guy. After my divorce, when my ex took the house in Marietta and my kids started spending more time at school than home, I moved out there full time. Just me, the tools, and the lake. I'd always been good with my hands, spent 15 years doing electrical and maintenance work in commercial buildings. But once I was on my own, I figured I'd just do what I love, fixing boats. Real boats, the kind with rusted hulls and cracked fiberglass, not the fancy yachts you see at marinas. Word got around, people started bringing me their old junkers, and before long I had a steady little side business going from the back of my property. Now technically, I'm outside the HOA line. That's always been the case. When the subdivision started expanding years ago, they tried to rope me in, but Dad had made sure to get it in writing that our parcel was excluded. He'd seen what was coming, rules, fines, meetings about mailbox paint colors, and he wanted no part of it. I kept that waiver tucked in an old folder with all the property paperwork, never thinking I'd need it again. And honestly, for a long time, everything was fine. The neighborhood changed, sure, more newcomers, more perfectly trimmed lawns and SUVs in every driveway, but I stayed in my lane. I waved when folks passed by. I didn't blast music, I didn't throw parties, I just worked in my shop, fished when I had the time, and watched the sun set over the lake with a cold beer in hand. My son Josh would come out when he could, especially over summers. He's a good kid. Smart, maybe too smart sometimes for his own good, but he's got heart. College took him out west, but he still called every week, still asked if I'd fixed up that old outboard engine sitting by the shed. He loved that place as much as I did. Hell, he learned to swim in that lake. First time he caught a fish, I remember he screamed like he'd landed a shark. We cooked it over a fire right there on the shore, just the two of us. Everything about that property, every stick, every nail, every sweat-soaked summer day I spent sanding and staining the dock, it all mattered. It was more than home. It was the last place that still felt real, untouched by all the noise and chaos that comes with the rest of the world. So yeah, when things started happening, when people started poking around, asking questions, making suggestions, it felt off. Not aggressive, not at first, just off. I ignored it, thought maybe I was just getting old and paranoid. But deep down, I think I knew something was brewing. I just didn't realize how far it would go. Not yet, anyway. It started with a note, just a plain white envelope tucked under the old cast-iron frog I keep on my porch to hold down papers when it gets windy. I almost missed it. Thought it was one of those coupon mailers I never read, but the handwriting on the front caught my eye. Tight, sharp, way too neat to be anything casual. It was addressed to Nathan Bennett, occupant. I opened it while standing there barefoot with a cup of coffee in hand, expecting it to be some sort of flyer. But no, it was a typed letter. HOA letterhead. Fancy little emblem in the corner like they were running a damn country club instead of a neighborhood board. It read like one of those gentle reminders you hear about in sitcoms. Said something about maintaining community aesthetic standards and how there'd been a few concerns raised about the visibility of certain watercraft and mechanical equipment. It didn't name me, but come on, there's no one else out here with a boat workshop and a 20-foot fiberglass base boat sitting on blocks near the dock. The closest neighbor's 50 yards away and mostly blind. This was aimed straight at me. I remember holding that letter and just staring at it for a second like, are you serious right now? I wasn't part of the HOA, never had been, never agreed to it. I had the documents to prove it. Hell, I probably had it laminated somewhere, the way my dad used to obsess over records. But still, something about that letter rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't even get mad. Not then. I just kind of laughed, shook my head, and stuck the letter to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a fish. Figured it was a mistake, some overzealous new board member casting a wide net. Happens. A few new people had moved in down the road, a couple with matching bikes and a Live, Laugh, Lake sign in the yard. I figured maybe they didn't know the layout yet. Couple days later, I noticed a white SUV parked at the end of my drive, just sitting there, engine running. I walked down to check it out, and as I got close, the window rolled down. Woman in her late 50s, pearl earrings, sunglasses that looked expensive enough to come with a warranty. She gave me that thin, tight-lipped HOA smile that says, "I'm pretending to be polite, but I'm really judging your entire existence." "Hi there," she said. "Karen Lively, I'm the new HOA president. Just wanted to personally say hello and, introduce myself." I nodded, told her I wasn't part of the HOA, but I appreciated the courtesy. I was friendly about it, I really was. She didn't blink, just sort of tilted her head like I'd said the sky was green. "Well, we've been doing a bit of a review of property lines," she said, "and technically the covenants apply to all homes within our development boundary, regardless of individual participation." That was news to me. I told her, calmly, that my land predates the HOA, that there's a signed exclusion document, and that it's filed with the county. She smiled like I just told her I believe in Bigfoot. "Oh," she said, still smiling, "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. These things happen." "We'll get it all sorted. In the meantime, if you could try to keep your watercraft a little less visible from the street, it would really help the neighborhood stay cohesive." Then she drove off. Just like that. No wave, no goodbye. Just peeled back into the subdivision like nothing happened. That's when I felt it. Not anger, not yet. Just this cold, weird tension, like a wire had been strung up between us and she'd plucked it. Just once, gently, but enough to know it was there. Enough for me to feel it humming in the background. I went back inside, poured the rest of my coffee down the sink, and stared out the window at the dock. Something had shifted. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew it wasn't going to be the last time I saw that SUV. About a week or so after that little driveway interaction with Karen, I got another envelope. This one came in the actual mail, not slipped under a frog. Same letterhead, same clean layout, same polite but firm tone that made me want to roll my eyes hard enough to see my brain. It claimed that upon further review, some of my permanent structures, they meant the dock and my workshop, might technically encroach upon common use areas outlined in the HOA's updated community boundary documents. I sat on my porch reading it, dumbfounded. I'd looked at my parcel map 100 times. Hell, I'd helped my dad stake the lines back when I was 16, digging post holes while he cursed at Georgia Clay. Nothing had changed. The lake hadn't moved. The trees hadn't wandered off. The land was mine. I called the number at the bottom of the letter, got a voicemail that said, "Thank you for calling Larkridge Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association." Real fancy. I left a message asking to speak with whoever was handling boundary adjustments. Never heard back. A few days later, I caught a guy standing near the tree line by my workshop with a camera, not even trying to be sneaky. Ball cap, cargo shorts, clipboard in hand, like he was on some sort of official inspection. I came around the corner with a wrench in hand. Didn't mean anything by it, I was literally working on an outboard, and the guy turned quick and started walking toward the cul-de-sac like he'd just remembered he left the oven on. That same night, I noticed the floodlight on the side of my shed had been unscrewed, just enough to keep it from turning on. I keep a few security cameras out there, cheap ones, but good enough, and sure enough, when I checked the footage, I saw a figure in a hoodie come around the back, unscrew the light, then stand there for a full minute just looking at the dock. Didn't touch anything, just looked. Then came the garbage. Someone dumped a half-full contractor bag of trash right at the edge of my property, just far enough from the road that it wasn't the city's problem, but close enough to be seen from the street. Soggy paper towels, fast food wrappers, a broken garden rake. I cleaned it up, figured maybe some lazy landscaper just didn't want to make the dump run, but then it happened again. Different trash, different spot, always just close enough to toe the line. I sent another email to the HOA, attached screenshots from my security footage, asked if they knew who might be walking around near my property line or why someone from their committee would be taking unauthorized photos. No response, not even a bounce back. I started asking neighbors if they'd gotten any weird letters. Most of them hadn't. A few just gave me that look, polite smile, eyes not quite meeting mine, and said, "Oh, I'm sure it's just confusion," before quickly changing the subject. Tomites. Only one guy, Alan from 2 lots down, muttered something like, "Oh, welcome to the show," before shaking his head and disappearing back into his garage. Then came the kicker. One morning I walked out and found the old pine by my dock had been spray painted. Big red X, right at eye level. Not huge, not sloppy like kids tagging stuff, but neat, deliberate, like someone marked it for removal. I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't on HOA land. It wasn't even close, but it was my tree, right in the middle of my view, casting shade over the dock I'd stained just last fall. And then that same day, I got another letter. This one had teeth. It stated that due to ongoing violations and continued disregard for HOA standards, I was now being fined. Yeah, fined. By an HOA I wasn't even a part of. They'd attached a sheet listing infractions like it was some damn rap sheet. Visible boat equipment, non-conforming exterior structure, unauthorized vehicle access, whatever the hell that meant, and then the cherry on top, obstruction of community oversight activity. Like I was interfering with some grand civic mission instead of shooing away trespassers. I called the number again. This time I got someone. Bernard, the treasurer apparently. Sounded like he'd rather be anywhere else. I asked him flat out, "What's going on? Why am I getting fined by an HOA I'm not even under?" He gave me this long pause, then said, "We're reviewing some documentation. The board believes there may have been a clerical misclassification regarding your parcel. Then, real fast, we advise compliance in the meantime." I laughed, not because it was funny, because it felt like I'd slipped into some alternate version of my own life where logic didn't apply. I told him I had paperwork. County stamped. I told him to come look at it. He said, "The board will reach out when necessary," and hung up. From that point on, the heat got turned up every damn week. More letters, more drive-bys, more concerns. One morning, I found my gate wide open, chain lying in the dirt. Another, my toolbox had been rifled through. Nothing taken, just enough moved around to know someone had been there. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd wake up thinking I heard footsteps on the gravel, only to find nothing. I started keeping my boots by the bed, just in case. And then there was the neighborhood app. Next door, someone posted about an unauthorized structure by the lake. No names, but photos were attached, cropped just enough to avoid showing faces, but clear as day. My dock, my shed, my boat. Comments started rolling in. People speculating, making jokes, asking if the weird guy down by the water was building a drug lab. I didn't even have an account. Didn't know until Kendra, a friend from across town, called me and said, "Are you okay? You're all over the community board." That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't just about letters. This wasn't about some uptight lady in pearls with too much time on her hands. They were trying to isolate me, turn me into a problem, turn the neighborhood against me so they could push whatever they were really after without anyone blinking twice. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going away. They were just getting started. I didn't go looking for a war. I swear to you, that was never the goal. After all the noise, the letters, the spray-painted tree, the fines, they hadn't broken anything I couldn't fix. Not yet. But it was chipping at me piece by piece, and I kept thinking, there's gotta be a way to make this stop without it turning into some full-blown mess. So I tried to do it the right way. The adult way. I dug out the folder my dad left me, the one with all the land documents, and I took it straight to the county office. It still smelled like the garage. Dust, old paper, a little motor oil on the edge. I figured someone down at the clerk's desk could clear this whole thing up in 5 minutes. Show them the waiver. Show them the maps. Done and dusted. But no, I get there, wait in line, finally get to the window, and this kid behind the counter, barely 20, chewing gum like he was trying to kill it, tells me he can't verify legacy exemptions on site. I ask if there's someone else I can talk to. He shrugs and gives me a form. Says I can file a request and someone will reach out. Fine, whatever. I file it. Then I call the HOA again. Same number, same voicemail. I leave a message, then another, then a third one, not angry, just firm. I say I want to sit down. Face to face, not a phone call, not another letter. I want to show them my paperwork. I want to talk like neighbors. I want this whole mess cleared up. No one calls back, so I go to the next HOA meeting. Yeah, I knew I wasn't technically a member, but the signs they'd posted around the community said it was an open forum, so I showed up. They held it in the clubhouse, that overbuilt barn-looking thing near the front entrance where they do pumpkin carving and wine tastings. I walked in wearing my work jeans, sat down in the back, and waited. People looked at me like I'd tracked in mud. I didn't say anything. I just sat and listened. Karen was up front, running the thing like a senator on a campaign stop. She smiled too big, thanked everyone for showing up, made a joke about neighborly disputes that got a few laughs. I kept my mouth shut until she opened the floor for community concerns. I stood up, didn't yell, didn't accuse, just laid it out. Brief, clear, respectful. I said, I've lived here for years. My property is not, and never has been, under HOA jurisdiction. I have the paperwork. I've been harassed, fined, had people trespassing on my land, and I want it to stop, that's all. The room went quiet. Karen smiled, tight, robotic, and said, Thank you, Mr. Bennett. We appreciate your input. However, any jurisdictional questions should be submitted to the board in writing. This isn't the proper venue. I said, I've submitted them, multiple times. She kept smiling. Then I'm sure someone will follow up. And that was it. They moved on. Next agenda item, community garden redesign. I stood there like an idiot while they talked about what color mulch to use. After that, I went home and called an attorney. Found a local guy with a decent reputation. Name was Harrington, old school type, handled real estate disputes and HOA stuff. When I met him, he leaned back in his leather chair, flipped through my documents, and said, Well, you're in the right, but right doesn't always mean easy. He told me HOAs operate in a weird gray area. They're not government, but they have power. He said if they're trying to change your classification or argue that your land was mistakenly exempted, it could turn into a nightmare of filings and appeals and legal hair-splitting. He asked me if I was willing to fight it in court. I said, I don't want to fight, I want them to leave me alone. He nodded like he'd heard that before, said he'd draft a cease and desist and send it certified. He also said to start documenting everything, photos, videos, every letter, every voice message, so I did. Meanwhile, I called the police after I found my front gate broken. Not open this time. Broken. Chain snapped, latch bent. Looked like someone had tried to force it open. Cop came out, took a quick look, said maybe it was the wind. The wind. I asked if he could file a report. He did, reluctantly. I could tell he didn't want to get in the middle of a neighborhood dispute. Probably thought I was paranoid. Then I emailed the county code enforcement office. Figured maybe they'd want to know someone was spray painting trees and filing bogus complaints. They thanked me for the info and told me they'd review the matter internally. That was it. No one came out. No follow-up. I even talked to a woman at the Attorney General's Consumer Affairs line. She was polite, said they'd logged my call, told me that HOA-related issues weren't typically within their scope unless there were signs of fraud or financial misconduct. So I started wondering, is this even worth it? I'd spent all day patching a client's old Glastron, sanding the hull, replacing the wiring, trying to focus, but it was always there, buzzing in the back of my mind like a hornet stuck in a jar. The uncertainty, the feeling of being boxed in. Every time a car slowed down near my place, I watched it. Every time a letter showed up, my stomach turned. Josh called and asked how things were going, and I lied. Told him everything was cool. I didn't want him worrying while he was out chasing his dreams. Even Kendra, who used to come by on weekends, stopped showing up. I think she was nervous. Didn't say it out loud, but I could hear it in her voice, like she didn't want to get caught in the middle. Can't blame her, really. I was tired, worn thin, not just from the work, but from the waiting. Waiting for the next letter, the next shadow in the yard, the next drive-by. At night, I'd sit on the dock and try to clear my head. Listen to the crickets, watch the moon on the water, try to remember what it felt like before all this started, before everything felt so damn fragile. And for the first time in my life, I started to think, maybe they win, maybe I sell, walk away, start over. But even just thinking it made me feel like I'd be betraying something bigger than myself. I didn't know what else to do. Every road I tried to take, legal, local, personal, it all looped back into the same dead end, the kind that makes you wonder if the system was rigged from the start. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Something deep down in my gut told me there was more to this than just a power trip from a woman in pearls. I just didn't know how deep it went. Not yet. The twist came on a Tuesday. Not that the day matters, but I remember because I was under my truck, elbow deep in rust and grease, trying to change out a rotted fuel line, when I heard a slow crunch of gravel from the front drive. I slid out from under the truck, wiped my hands on a rag, and saw him, old Roy, from down at the end of the road. I hadn't seen Roy in a while. People said he'd gone kind of sideways after his wife passed, mostly kept to himself. Some folks talked about him like he was slipping. You know how people can be when someone doesn't play along with the neighborhood HOA bake sale vibe. They wrote him off, but there he was, standing at the edge of my drive, holding something in one of those old plastic grocery bags that looks like it's about to rip any second. I walked over and said, "Hey." He didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked up at me with that kind of half-lidded squint that means a person's been thinking about something for a long time. "You still got your daddy's land documents?" he asked, voice rough like he'd been gargling gravel. I told him, "Yeah, of course I did." "Why?" He reached into the bag and pulled out a thin manila folder. It was yellowed at the corners, the label faded, but he held it out to me like it was some kind of relic. "This," he said, "is your key." I opened it right there, standing next to him in the sun. Inside was a copy, an actual copy, of an exemption letter dated back to the late 90s. It was from when the HOA first formed. Same development, same name. The document had a seal and a signature from the original board president, a guy named Darnell Lott, who I'd only heard about in stories. Apparently, he was one of the few who didn't like the idea of dragging everyone into some governing circle just to dictate where you could put your trash can. The letter stated in clear black ink that my parcel, my exact address, and lot number was exempt from any and all HOA obligations, and that the HOA recognized it as such in perpetuity unless voluntarily revoked by the owner in writing. I read that line 3 times. In perpetuity isn't the kind of phrase you forget. I looked at Roy. He just gave me a look and said, "Thought you might need a second copy, figured maybe they lost yours on purpose." That hit me like a brick to the chest. Not just what he said, but how he said it. Like he already knew, like he'd seen this play before, and I realized Roy's not crazy. Roy just stopped trusting people a long time ago, and maybe he had good reason. I asked him how he got the copy. He said back when the HOA was forming, his wife, God rest her, used to help type up the board letters and meeting minutes. She didn't like how they operated, so she quietly kept duplicates of anything that looked off. She'd filed them away in boxes in their garage, just in case. Roy said he remembered seeing my name back then. Remembered my dad, fighting tooth and nail to stay out of the whole thing. "It's all there," he said. "They know they're wrong. They're just counting on you not knowing." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at the letter, shining a flashlight over it like I was checking for buried treasure. I compared it to my own copy, the one I'd filed away years ago. They matched word for word, except mine was just a scanned image. Roy's had the seal. The ink. A living signature. It had weight. Next morning, I drove out to Kennesaw to see Kendra. I hadn't talked to her in a few weeks. Not really, but I needed a fresh set of eyes on this. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt once, just listened, flipping through the pages, occasionally muttering something under her breath. Then she looked up and said, "You need someone who knows what they're doing with this, a lawyer who doesn't mind kicking a hornet's nest." I said I'd already tried one, but he hadn't made much of a dent. She told me to talk to a woman named Caroline, someone she used to work with, retired technically, but still sharp as a tack. Used to handle land use and HOA disputes when she practiced. Lived just 2 streets over, apparently. I'd passed her house a dozen times and never realized it. I reached out, not expecting much. Caroline picked up right away. She had this calm, measured tone, the kind that makes you feel like everything's under control even if it's not. She said, "Bring the documents. Let's have coffee." Her house was neat. Books everywhere, papers stacked with precision, like she was always 10 seconds from diving back into work. She looked over everything I had, Roy's copy, my copy, the letters, the fines, the photos, the spray paint, and didn't say much at first, just flipped through, reading slowly. Finally, she looked up and said, "They don't have a leg to stand on." She explained it in plain terms. The exemption was real, binding, and more than that, if they'd been acting on that land knowing it wasn't under their control, sending fines, ordering removals, manipulating records, they could be in some serious trouble, especially if it could be shown that they had financial motives for doing so. I blinked. "Financial motives?" She nodded. "You know Larkland Developments?" I did. They were one of the big players around here. Had signs posted near the new highway expansion, building those ugly 3-story townhouses with fake shutters and no parking. I hadn't thought about them in the context of this, though. Caroline stood up, went to a drawer, pulled out an old file of her own. Inside were clippings, notes, property sales. Larkland had been slowly acquiring land all around the lake. Quietly, under different LLC names. It's always with an HOA stamp of approval. "They're trying to get control of the shoreline," she said. "Piece by piece, you're the last lot standing between them and a full stretch of developable property." That was the moment everything snapped into place. The harassment, The boundary games, the fines, the silence from the county. It wasn't about my boat or the shed or the dock. It was never about that. They wanted me gone, and not because I was a nuisance, but because I was in the way, because my land was the one piece they couldn't buy, so they decided to break me instead. I sat there with my hands around a mug of coffee that had gone cold, staring at the folder in front of me, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel helpless. I felt something else entirely. I felt ready. It's a strange kind of shift that happens when you stop trying to win their way and start thinking in terms of your own rules. The second I understood what was really going on, that this wasn't just neighborhood politics, but something bigger, a quiet land grab masked behind bylaws and fake politeness, my whole outlook changed. It wasn't about defending myself anymore. It was about exposing them, turning the lights on and watching the roaches scatter. But I knew I couldn't just storm the gates. Not with this crowd. They were too careful, too calculated. They'd built a machine, tight, polished, and insulated. You don't take that down by yelling. You take it down by loosening one bolt at a time until the whole thing falls in on itself. The first thing I did was bring Caroline fully into the loop. She was sharper than anyone I'd met in a courtroom. Retired or not, her brain ran like a Swiss watch. She had a way of connecting dots you didn't even know were dots. She read everything, every letter, every clause in the HOA documents, every whisper of those shady LLCs, and started outlining their weak points like a surgeon marking incision lines. Then there was Roy. Once he saw I was serious, he brought out more than just that exemption letter. Turns out his late wife hadn't just saved a few old files, she'd saved everything. Meeting minutes, mailing lists, financial records, even handwritten notes from early board members. It was all boxed up in a dusty corner of his garage under a tarp. We spent a whole afternoon combing through it. I felt like we were digging through a crime scene archive. That's where we found it, a series of annual financial reports signed off by the treasurer, Bernard. Most of it looked boring. Line items, landscaping expenses, security patrol invoices, but buried in the paperwork were transfers to a vendor named Blue Lake Consulting. Only Caroline noticed the discrepancy. The company was listed as handling environmental assessments, but the amounts were too high for something that simple. She started making calls. Turns out Blue Lake Consulting wasn't a consulting firm at all. It was a shell. Registered to an address that traced back to, guess who, Larkland Developments. Right there in the records, they were laundering HOA funds to prep for a buyout. And my land, that was the linchpin. They couldn't close the loop without it. But proof alone wasn't going to do it. We needed to build pressure, make it impossible for them to keep the lid on. So I started doing something I hadn't done in years. I talked to people, not the friendly way from the porch kind of talk. I talked. Honest, face-to-face, uncomfortable conversations. Started with Alan, the guy who muttered "Welcome to the show" way back when this started. I caught him outside trimming his hedges, asked him point blank if he ever got fined for anything. He looked around like he wasn't sure it was safe to talk, then nodded, told me about a time they tried to fine him for excess shade from a tree on his lot, said he paid it just to avoid the headache. I told him what I found. Not all of it, just enough to make him blink, told him they were pushing me off my land for a developer's check. That's when I realized something else. People were scared, not just annoyed, scared. Nobody wanted to cross Karen or Bernard or the old cop on the security committee. They had this whole little intimidation routine down to a science. You step out of line, and suddenly your mailbox gets flagged, or your fence needs repainting, or a noise complaint shows up from nowhere. So I stopped trying to win hearts. I focused on the ones who had nothing left to lose. Roy was already in. Alan started sending me names of other neighbors who'd gotten hit with fines or random citations. One of them, Beth, single mom, works double shifts at the clinic, told me they threatened to block her kids' use of the community playground because her shed was 2 feet over regulation height. 2 feet. People started to open up. Quietly. Off the record, they didn't want to go public yet, but they were willing to talk, willing to share screenshots, emails, letters. A pattern started to form. Caroline built a file, dozens of pages long, not just on me, but on everyone they'd strong-armed. Fines with no appeal, violations that weren't real. Bylaws applied inconsistently depending on who you were or how much you pushed back. Meanwhile, Josh came home for a weekend and saw how deep I was in it. I hadn't planned on dragging him into this. I still saw him as the kid who caught frogs in the cattails, but he wasn't a kid anymore. He saw the plans, the maps, the paper trail, and said, "Screw that, let's burn 'em." Not literally, but he had a fire in his gut I hadn't seen in a long time. He started going through the HOA's online portal, scraping every document he could access. Meeting notices, newsletters, PDF reports, they were sloppy. Missed meeting quorums, dates changed without notice. Votes held in private. Josh even found an instance where Karen had approved something solo, without a board vote. We saved it all. The plan came together in layers. Caroline drafted a formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office, detailing everything from boundary manipulation to potential misuse of funds. At the same time, she started preparing a civil suit we could file locally if it came to that. Aimed not just at the HOA, but at individual board members. She said the word liability enough times that I started to see how powerful it was. But legal stuff takes time, and we needed to rattle the cage now. We decided the first move had to be public, not some anonymous leak, not a whisper campaign. It had to be visible. I didn't love the idea, but Josh convinced me to go on the neighborhood app next door and post. We crafted a message, nothing accusatory, just facts, just questions. I included a redacted screenshot of the original exemption letter, blacked out the signature but left the date and HOA seal clear. I asked, "Why is the HOA fining me when this document exists? Who authorized it? Where are the meeting notes that support these actions?" I posted it, then logged off, and waited. It wasn't revenge, not yet, it was just a spark, but I had a feeling the fire wasn't far behind. I didn't expect the post to blow up. Honestly, I figured it might get a handful of polite comments and then quietly disappear, like most things on that app do. I thought maybe it'd be enough to make them sweat a little. But by the end of that day, it had over 100 replies, and not the fake smiling, HOA praising kind either. People were pissed. Some folks were confused, asking how that letter could have been ignored for so long. Others, neighbors I barely knew, started chiming in with their own stories. One guy posted about how he got fined for parking his work truck in his own driveway, even though it was technically allowed under the bylaws. A woman said her dog run was flagged as a non-approved structure, even after she got written permission to install it. The thread started unraveling like a cheap sweater, and I just sat there watching it catch flame. Then came the pushback. The post disappeared. Just, poof, gone. No warning, no explanation. I tried to log back into the app and got hit with a message saying my account had been suspended for violating community guidelines. I stared at it, not even surprised. That's when Josh walked in, holding his phone, smirking. "They took yours down," he said, "but they didn't take down the screenshots." Apparently, he'd already saved the thread, reposted it through a burner account, and tagged a handful of neighborhood groups on Facebook, Reddit, and some watchdog HOA pages he found. Caroline even got in on it, reaching out to a local journalist she knew from back in her practicing days. The woman agreed to take a look, no promises, just interest. But that wasn't the biggest move we made. The biggest move happened 2 days later, when Caroline marched right into the county clerk's office and filed a formal grievance. Not just as a resident, but as an attorney of record representing me. She delivered copies of the original exemption, Roy's documents, screenshots of the next door thread before it vanished, and a letter addressed to the county zoning committee accusing the HOA of knowingly engaging in boundary manipulation for the benefit of a third-party developer. It was legal dynamite. Meanwhile, I kept working the ground game. I knocked on doors. Not everyone, just the ones I knew were tired, the ones who'd left quiet comments or sent me messages off the radar. I showed them what I had. I didn't pressure, I just talked. Normal, honest conversation, neighbor to neighbor. One of them, Dan, was a retired firefighter. He had a folder of his own, a collection of citations he never fought, just paid, even though they made no damn sense. Another, Trina, had been thinking of moving because she couldn't deal with the board's harassment anymore. We started something small, just a group text at first, then a meeting. Not in the clubhouse, no way they'd let us in, but out in my backyard, chairs in a loose circle, some people bringing drinks, others just showing up with tired eyes and open ears. There were about 10 of us that first night. We called ourselves the Outliers, half joking, but when Bernard showed up the next day wearing a pastel polo and fake friendly grin, things stopped feeling like a joke. He came up my driveway like he owned it. I met him halfway, arms crossed, phone in my pocket, already recording. "Just wanted to chat," he said. "Off the record, friendly-like." I asked him if he had authorization from the board to do that. He smiled, real slow. "Let's not get all technical. You've caused quite a stir." I didn't answer. He leaned in just a bit and said, "It'd be a shame if things got ugly. Nobody wants that, least of all you." I felt it in my chest, the urge to swing, but I didn't. I smiled instead, that tight, dead-eyed smile they usually give me. "Is that a threat, Bernard?" He blinked. Just once, then shook his head. "Of course not, just a neighborly warning." I let him walk off, but I made sure that video went to Caroline and Josh before the sun went down. From there, things got loud. Someone leaked the financials. Not just the HOA's sanitized versions, they got into the raw accounts, line items, contractor names, payments, and right there in black and white were the Blue Lake transfers. Caroline connected the dots fast. The entity behind Blue Lake traced back to a holding company owned by Larkland Developments. The same company that had filed permits with the county a few months earlier to start preliminary exploratory assessments of the lakefront for possible commercial rezoning. They were planning it, had been for a while. All they needed was the last strip of land to fall into place. Mine. Caroline drafted another letter, this one sent certified to the board and to the county commission. It included everything: exemption documents, suspected financial conflict of interest, potential ethics violations. We also submitted a formal complaint to the State Bar Association about Bernard, who turns out wasn't just a treasurer, he held an inactive law license, which made the whole neighborly warning a real problem. At the same time, the small group in my backyard grew. More chairs, more stories, someone brought folding tables, one woman baked banana bread. It started to feel like a community again, but this time ours, not theirs. Then, in a move I still can't quite believe, Karen tried to hold an emergency board meeting, closed doors, no notice, off the books, but someone inside flipped. A leak. They sent Caroline the invite, so we showed up, not barging in, just standing out front, copies of our documents in hand, handing them out to every board member as they walked through the door. No yelling, no drama, just paper, truth, and too many witnesses for them to ignore. Karen wouldn't look at me. Bernard walked by like I didn't exist. Marshall, the former cop on their little security team, just stood at the edge of the lot, arms crossed, like he was daring me to make a scene. I didn't have to, because the scene was already unfolding. And for the first time in a long damn while, it wasn't them pulling the strings. It was us, and we weren't backing down. You could feel it shift, the air, the tension, the way people looked at each other when they passed on the sidewalk. It was like the whole neighborhood had been holding its breath for too long and finally let it out all at once. And the weirdest part? I didn't have to do much more at that point. The avalanche had already started. It began with the article. Local reporter by the name of Vanessa Rowe, friend of Caroline's from way back, took the story, said she'd been looking for something with teeth, and boy, did we have it. She came by, walked the property, interviewed me, Roy, even Josh. Spent a few hours with Caroline going through documents, highlighting notes, snapping photos of the original exemption letter and the HOA financial filings that tied directly to Larkland's little shell company. When the article dropped, it wasn't buried on the back page. It was right there in the Sunday print edition and blasted all over their site. Neighborhood power play, HOA accused of land grab in quiet lakeside community. They ran my full name, showed my doc, showed the fake fines. Quoted Caroline calling the whole operation a malicious abuse of community authority. The headline alone was enough to send everyone scrambling. The reaction was instant. Phones started ringing. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to talk. Some apologized for not stepping in sooner. Others looked guilty, like maybe they'd known something didn't smell right but didn't have the guts to speak up. And then the HOA board cracked. It was like watching a dam give out one brick at a time. First was Greg, some second-string member who resigned quietly and deleted his Facebook the same night. Then 2 more board members sent an email to the entire neighborhood distancing themselves from recent leadership decisions. They claimed they were unaware of the full scope of what was happening. I call that convenient timing, but sure. Welcome aboard. Karen tried to act like it was all just a misunderstanding. She sent out one of those HOA-wide emails with too many commas and not enough truth, talking about how the board had only ever acted in the best interest of community values. But the damage was done. No one was buying it, especially not after the meeting. Oh yeah, the meeting. The county stepped in. They weren't playing games anymore. Between the formal grievance Caroline filed and the public blowback from the article, the zoning board called for an emergency public hearing to review Larkland's land acquisition efforts, including their connections to our HOA. It wasn't held in some cozy clubhouse this time. They booked a hall downtown. Rows of chairs, news cameras in the back, microphones on long cords. It felt like we were on trial, except this time we weren't the ones sitting in the hot seat. Caroline presented first. Calm, precise, lethal. She laid out every documented infraction, every forged or missing vote, every questionable transfer. She had emails, signatures, screenshots. It was like watching someone dismantle a machine in real time, just taking it apart piece by piece with surgical accuracy. Then Roy got up and told his story, quiet but powerful. You could hear a pin drop when he held up the original exemption letter and said, "This is what they didn't want him to find." A few people in the audience actually clapped. Karen tried to defend herself. Bernard didn't even show, and when the board asked the county attorney to weigh in, the man simply said, "It appears there was an intentional misapplication of jurisdiction. At best, this is a violation of municipal policy. At worst, criminal fraud." Boom. That word, fraud, hung in the room like smoke. By the end of the hearing, the county issued a motion to suspend all pending HOA actions regarding my property until further investigation, but they didn't stop there. They opened a formal audit into the HOA's finances. Requested copies of all prior meeting minutes, board votes, vendor contracts. If you listened close, you could almost hear Karen's composure cracking right there at the front table. Back in the neighborhood, the response was mixed. Some people were furious, not at me, but at them, for putting everyone at risk, for wasting dues, for trying to quietly sell off land that didn't belong to them. Others stayed quiet, embarrassed, trying to figure out which way the wind was blowing, but the ones who mattered, they showed up. People brought by meals, offered help with repairs around the property. One guy, a vet who'd never said more than 3 words to me before, walked up and handed me a hand-carved wooden sign that said, "Hold the line." I hung it in my workshop that same day, and Josh, man, I hadn't seen him that fired up since high school baseball. He helped organize a neighborhood potluck, invited every resident to come, no matter where they stood. More than half the community showed up. People brought folding tables, baked casseroles. Even some of the more decorative types brought centerpieces. Caroline gave a small speech, nothing too dramatic, just something about integrity and standing up, even when it's hard. I didn't speak, I didn't need to. I just stood near the back, beer in hand, watching folks laugh and talk and maybe, for the first time, actually see each other. There was no big announcement that night, no final verdict, but it felt like justice had started to settle in the air. The power wasn't in their hands anymore. It was in ours, and for the first time in a long damn while, that little patch of land by the lake felt like home again. Not a battleground, not a target, just mine. The lake's still as glass today. Not a ripple, not even from the ducks. You ever notice how quiet everything feels after a storm passes? Not just calm, but clear, like the air's been scrubbed clean and you can finally breathe again. I'm sitting out on the dock now, my dock, boots kicked off, coffee in one hand, and a half-finished carburetor sitting in my lap. The shed's open behind me, warm smell of oil and cedar drifting out. It feels good, like life clicked back into place. Not perfect, but solid, like it's mine again. Funny thing is, not much really looks different around here. Houses are still lined up neat and proper, American flags still hang from porches, and someone's sprinklers just kicked on across the street, ticking like a metronome. But there's a different rhythm now. People wave longer. They make eye contact. Even the ones who kept their heads down during the mess. Some of them bring cookies now. One guy even came over with a 6-pack and an apology. I didn't win a lottery. I didn't walk away rich. I still patch up old boats and chase parts across the county and argue with Rust like it owes me money. Lots, but there's a peace in that work now, a rhythm, and knowing that no one's going to show up with a clipboard and a smile trying to tell me what kind of life I'm allowed to live, well, that means something. Roy still comes by now and then. We sit out back with sweet tea or beer, depending on the day, and shoot the breeze like we've been doing it for years. Josh built him a little shelf in his garage to organize all those old files, says we should digitize it all. just in case someone needs a history lesson later. Roy laughed so hard I thought he was going to choke. Josh, man, he's a different kid now. Sharper, more grounded. I think seeing what went down here gave him something real to chew on. He even said he might change his major. Law, maybe public policy. I told him to pick something that doesn't kill his soul. He said, "Nah, Dad, I want to learn how to fight smart." Caroline's still around, too. Not just as a lawyer or a neighbor, but as a friend. She never made it about ego. Just did what was right, then went back to her garden like it was no big thing. I told her once that she reminded me of a lighthouse, always steady, even when everything else was going sideways. She said, "Just old bones and habit, but I know better." As for the HOA, what's left of it? Well, they're not calling the shots anymore. County put in a temporary oversight committee while they sort through the audit fallout. Bernard resigned quietly. Karen disappeared. Rumor has it she moved in with her sister in Florida. There was no trial, no mugshot, nothing made for TV, just a quiet exit, the way cowards usually leave. That's fine. I don't need fireworks. Just truth, just ground under my boots that nobody can take from me. Sometimes at night I'll walk the shoreline, flashlight in hand, just listening. It's not that I'm on edge, at least not like I used to be, it's more like habit, like checking the locks before bed. But now, when I shine the light over the dock or the trees or the shop, I don't feel hunted, I feel rooted. This land, this life, it's been tested, bent hard, but it didn't break, and neither did I. So yeah, that's the story. That's how it went down. All I wanted was to be left alone, to live a quiet life by the water, the same way my dad did before me. And instead, I found myself in a war I didn't start, up against people who thought they could twist the rules, twist the truth, and steamroll anyone who didn't get in line. But they underestimated something simple. They underestimated what happens when a man has nothing to lose, but everything worth protecting. And now? Now, I sit on this dock, sip my coffee, and smile when the wind shifts, because I didn't just keep my land, I kept me.